building a great product org, you're ultimately hiring for people to love and own your product the way the founders do, the way that their original team does. You're hiring for immense amounts of curiosity and leadership and commitment to execution. How do you leverage the power of the Rippling platform from the ability to create workflows, create very granular groups, and so on, while also striving to build the best product experience that you can? Groups are powering everything that Rippling does. That makes my product better. How do we unlock the power of the platform to further differentiate our product? I think that's a fun part, and a really challenging part of product management is...
Hey, this is Carlos, CEO at Product School and your host on the Product Podcast. Today's guest is Anique Drumright, General Manager and VP of Product at Rippling. Rippling is an absolute rocket ship in the HR and IT space, currently commanding a massive $16.8 billion valuation and accelerating past $570 million in annual revenue. Rippling maintains its incredible product velocity and AI automation by employing over 100 former founders. During our conversation, Anique breaks down her playbook to build high-performing product teams based on her experience leading multi-billion-dollar products at Uber, Loom, and now Rippling. The GM mindset, how modern product leaders must pivot from managing a feature backlog to owning a full P&L and driving the business as a true general manager. Compound startups, the strategic framework for building an all-in-one platform that creates a systemic competitive moat by consolidating multiple enterprise categories. The go and see culture, the counterintuitive leadership strategy for keeping a startup's ruthless velocity and high product quality with a global team of over 4,000 employees. Let's dive in.
Hello, everybody. I'm very aware of the fact that I'm between this and the happy hour, so I promise I'll make this as interactive and as fun as possible. It's easy for me because I have Anique, who's awesome. Welcome, Anique.
Hey, no pressure.
So we're doing a live edition of the Product Podcast. This is a podcast that I've been hosting for the last 6 years. It's funny, at the beginning, nobody cared. Now, a lot of people care, but it's always more fun when we get to do these things in person and there is actually an audience. So here we go. Well, Anique and I go way back. You first contributed to Product School. You were at Uber, I think, and you've been constantly doing things for the community as you continue evolving in your career. So you've worked at Uber, TripActions, Loom, and now Rippling.
Yes, it's been a journey with Product School.
I have a few stats here about Rippling because it's pretty impressive. So you guys raised approximately 8.5 billion across multiple rounds at a latest valuation of 16.8 billion. Reported annual recurring revenue exceeding 570 million as of early 2025. You have over 20,000 customers, over 4,000 employees globally. And there's one stat that I love, which is there's over 100 former founders working there.
Yeah, and I think some of those stats are even a year later very much out of date. I'm like, well, that sounds a little small. But yes, it's very impressive, Rippling's growth and scale and what it's able to do for customers by working across the entirety of their stack.
So the theme for this conversation is building high-performing product teams. I mean, as I look at your track record, you've worked at Uber, TripActions, Loom, Rippling, and there's some incredible leaders of our generation. Travis Kalanick at Uber and now Parker Conrad. So curious to know, as you reverse engineer this experience, what are some of the patterns that would inform the fact that some of these teams are all extremely high-performing and successful?
Yeah, I think so Uber, I joined as an IC. I was so lucky that was my introduction to tech, to product. It was a company at the time that believed in ruthless ownership. We could do anything. We were all there to change the world. And it was so impressive to see that at a 5,000 person scale, 10,000 person scale, that mentality, that willingness for every employee to chase down the right customer experience. And I think at Rippling, I'm a year and a quarter into my journey, and it is wildly impressive to watch Rippling build so many products that are so connected to critical operations and responsibilities of a company in parallel, and to watch the company, obviously led by Parker, incubate so many parallel ideas and then very carefully ensure that they are completely interoperable from a platform perspective. And I think, TripActions and Loom, I joined much earlier on, right? We were at the beginning of our journeys. And I think what I've taken away from all four of these companies is building a great product org. You're ultimately hiring for people to love and own your product the way the founders do, the way that their original team does. You're hiring for immense amounts of curiosity and leadership and commitment to execution. And I think that's been very consistent across all of the high-performing product teams that I've been a part of.
Commitment of execution, I think that's a critical term here. As a founder myself, especially from a product background, I know how hard it is to delegate. And even though I have to, in order to scale, you still want to be in the details in many ways. So for someone who's been so involved in these early days with exceptional founders, like, how is that relationship? Like, how are you able to ensure that the vision of the founder is still manifested into the product while still there's room for you to influence that vision and maintain that speed of shipping?
That is a really good question. I think there's two components of it. One is like loving being part of a high-performing team. Like, I played soccer, I played rugby. I'm just a junkie for wanting to be part of a high-performing team. And I think that is ultimately what a growth stage startup is and what working for high-performing founders is. And I think that's what they want to be surrounded by, because you have to earn that trust, right? They took immense amounts of risk. And you're constantly trying out to be on the team, right? To be on this mission and contribute. And so I think for me, I actually just really enjoy it. And so I I put my best foot forward, and I try to meet their bar of ownership and commitment and thoroughness. So I think one piece of it is just mentality. What's the mentality you're bringing to work? I think the other piece is constantly learning and having a curiosity for their perspective, and knowing that you're not going to get it right 100% of the time, but you're going to own it and you're going to get it right really fast. And that you ultimately want to build the best product for customers, for joint customers. And I found that generally that approach and commitment has worked really well for me.
I want to try to unpack this even further for kind of the next generation of leaders that start being groomed under you here. You mentioned you're an athlete, and I think some of that transfers really well to the business world, because almost ultimately this can be treated as a sport as well. And I admire people who know they are not going to give up. They are going to hustle. They are going to do whatever it takes. At the same time, you guys are over 4,000 employees right now, right? So it's something magical about the early days, right? When everybody's in the same room, where everybody has direct access to the founder, everybody's moving at the speed of light. Now, how are you able to maintain those type of principles, that type of speed and hunger at a level where obviously you need to delegate more? It's not just the founder to you, it's also you to the rest of the team.
So I think there's a component of it that is organizational, which is, are you able to create teams with singular obsessions, right? I lead the IT business. I think about IT all day, every day, and it's great. And I have an incredible sales team and marketing team and product team and implementation team, and we're all thinking about this singular problem. And you'll see those extreme areas of focus throughout Rippling, which allows, a 5,000 person company to deeply own the work that they are working on. It was very similar to what Ariel at TripActions used to do. If we were building something 0 to 1, it was a carved out team, right? It was, how do you create singular focus that allows a group of people to go as hard at something as possible? And then I think the other component that Rippling does really well organizationally is making sure that it's measurable, right? How do we measure what we are driving towards? How do we put goals in front of us that seem impossible so that you move faster, right? And you move with velocity and with clarity of thought. And that's what I think organizationally Rippling does exceptionally well. And then I think the other piece is hiring, right? And the mixture of the team. And are you hiring for people who want to create things and build businesses and talk to customers and go and see and own the details? Something that Parker models unbelievably well from the very top is a go and see mentality, right? If there is a customer issue that he doesn't understand, he will run it all the way down, like all the way down to the chat, because he wants to understand what is the customer experience of our customers. Where did the product have gaps? Where did the implementation have gaps? What can we learn from it? How do we improve? And when your CEO founder is operating with that way, it sets the bar for you, right? And it sets the bar for the rest of the employee base. And so you have these teams that have singular focus and are able to attempt, right, to get to that bar of ownership. And I think it's a lot of Rippling success.
Let's talk about org design, because I think you guys have a very unique structure in the sense that product, or the product that you own, graduated to a point where it's now a business unit. You are a GM, not just the VP of product, right? So what does it take for a product to get to that level? And what is the difference for you now as the GM in terms of how you're measuring success for the entire business unit?
Yep. And I would say with Loom, we also moved in that direction. And that was a little bit differently because for different reasons, it was a product-led growth motion. And it became very clear that product, marketing, sales were very much intertwined, and it would be more successful for us to operate as a single business unit rather than matrixed. I think for Rippling, it has to do with, in many ways, like, what's the best customer experience, right? If I'm working with someone on implementation that is implementing me on payroll, is that going to be as strong? If that same person implements you, is that as strong of a customer experience as someone who's getting implemented for IT, for example? And that goes all the way through down to the end of like a support agent supporting you after you've been implemented. And I think that it really does come from the place of what's the ideal customer experience from a sales perspective, an implementation perspective, a product perspective. And if you are building and trying to make a step change in growth in that area of the business, isn't it more likely to succeed if all of those functions are working as a single team?
And especially for someone who comes from a product background, I think it also influences the entire culture for the company. Like, there's a care for what you are building that is different than if that GM would come from a different background, such as sales, for example. So the trade-off as well is that as you build your own business unit, there might be some redundancy because you're ultimately building a business and maybe there's another GM building their own business. So how do you ensure that there is actually shared services and like a common goal, and we don't have different GMs pushing in different directions?
I think that's a really good question. I think that we are evolving and we get many things right and a few things wrong. But I think, Matt Plink, who's the CRO of Rippling, has done an incredible job of supporting the business units and ensuring that he's staying involved and he's supporting to make sure that the units are successful and also to make sure that the customers are successful as they may want to, expand their Rippling footprint across IT, across payroll, across spend.
I want to talk about the expansion motion here because you lived through Loom, which is, I think, one of the pioneers or these huge success cases in the PLG motion, right? And eventually led to an acquisition by Atlassian. Rippling, kind of the same in a way, even though they had as platform aspirations, they had some few point solutions and they expanded rapidly. So what is that motion for, let's say, a company that doesn't have a platform in place? Let's call it like a startup that is trying to get their first HR and IT platform. And how do you kind of prove enough value to potentially expand into other verticals?
I think for Rippling, the key insight is all of your business operations run off of employee data, right? Every person who joins a company, they get a paycheck, hopefully, they get a computer, they get access to apps, maybe they need to run an expense report. And, right now, if I think about IT, I think I just looked at a user survey and it was like 65% of IT teams are using over 7 different products. And like 13% are using over 10 or over 13. But it's just a lot of overhead. And so if you are starting a company, why on earth would you want to be talking to 20 or 30 different vendors? And then there's all of this efficiency when you're hiring, when you're offboarding, when you're changing teams, when you're reorging, because we own all of that employee data. We can just streamline all of those activities.
And that makes total sense. I think back in the day, somehow we got it twisted, where a lot of people wanted to buy a tool for a single solution. And the next time you have to go in the details and do the whole thing, buy a platform. The trade-off with the platform sometimes is that because they don't have that singular focus, they cannot be the best at everything. So from a product perspective, I want to understand more about how do you ensure that the reason why someone would buy a platform is not just convenience and maybe cost savings, but also like quality of the product?
I think that's the role of the product manager. I think that's what makes being a PM at Rippling really fun. How do you leverage the power of the Rippling platform from the ability to create workflows, create very granular groups, and so on, while also striving to build the best product experience that you can? Yeah, I think that's the job of the PM.
Well, I'm glad that it's so clear to you, and maybe we can share some of that because I've lived through this evolution. When I started product school like 12 years ago, product management wasn't even cool. So a lot of people would come and say, what is a product manager? What are they supposed to do? And I think early days, a lot of that was around just user satisfaction, not so much bridging that user satisfaction with business outcomes. Obviously, in a whole different world now where the expectations are much higher. But in your case specifically, as you think about the responsibilities of your product team, how are you really ensuring that they are balancing those two important pieces?
I think there's also an assumption in what you're saying that the platform does not enhance the singular product. And I would disagree with that because, from a platform perspective, you're able to invest really, really heavily in, let's say, groups, because groups are powering everything that Rippling does. That means when I'm building an access management tool, I probably have one of the most powerful granular groups capabilities out in the market. That makes my product better. And so I think it's about taking that mentality to building products and ensuring that as we're doing product reviews, we're thinking about How do we unlock the power of the platform to further differentiate our product? How do we reach across product lines within IT, within HR and IT to unlock more value? And I think the clearest example or like go-to example for me is really in the hiring experience, right? In a traditional product, you hire 5 people and then you create a ticket for IT. With Rippling, that's all, right? You just are like, yep, I need to hire that person. I need to send that device. They should definitely have access to that, right? It's completely streamlined. And it's just a really different way to approach product development.
And I think that mindset is especially powerful in companies that don't have legacy, because why wouldn't they start from scratch that way? But when you also go and work with larger enterprises that might have some of those point solutions in place, how do you kind of penetrate that account? And if they're not ready to go for an all-in-one platform, still find ways to deliver some value so you can potentially expand as you go?
I mean, I think all customer-facing teams, it's really important to listen to your customers, right? If you listen to their problems and you understand the products that your product is really good at solving, you will find the right pace, the right way to partner. But I think it begins with listening and asking really good questions of anyone evaluating your product.
Let's say you are in that scenario right now. It's large enterprise. They'll say like, hey, Anique, I love your product. I get it. But look, I'm using this.
Really putting me on the spot on
I
this
think
one.
the good thing about product teams now is that they're thinking business, right? And are obviously a business leader. So very curious for a lot of folks in the room as they are moving up market and facing the situation where there is a incumbent already in the system and they have to figure out some sort of entryway via integrations or something else to still have the agency to eventually expand, right? I'm curious to know, how are you able to kind of prove that concept in ways that allows these people to get you in the door, even if they're not ready to deploy the entire platform?
I mean, I think one of the greatest proof points of Rippling is how much more efficient we make teams, right? That you don't need to have, a 20-person team to do this thing, that the product actually enables you to scale in a different way. The mission of Rippling is to free smart people to work on hard problems. And I think that's really the ROI of the product that we partner with customers on, is how do we ensure that your team is working on the hardest things versus, let's say, admin work or operational work that the Rippling product can really take care of for you.
I was listening, and I love that. Every time I hear someone talk about ROI, it's like, great, you're speaking my language. Because like ultimately, that's what an executive would care about, right? How is this going to deliver more value to customers, make me more money, reduce some cost? I was listening to Parker's interview at the Sequoia podcast last week.
So good.
So good. And one of the things he said is that he was able to analyze what is the size of the HR or IT teams for the companies that use a competitor of Rippling versus the size of the teams of the companies that use Rippling. And it was around half the size for the teams that use Rippling. And not that that's the only success metric, but it was like such a powerful way to demonstrate that with a better solution, you can actually automate workflows and you can probably get to value much faster with eventually less headcount.
Absolutely.
So I also want to kind of pivot the conversation a little bit more and talk about how you're thinking now as a GM, as you start kind of allocating bets, right? Like it's a pretty big business now and there's so many directions you can take it to. So, and there are a lot of voices in the room, right? So other than listening to customers, listening to your founder, listening to yourself, like what is that exercise? We're in Q4, perfect timing, to do the strategy planning. Like how are you approaching strategy planning?
It's like you were with me all day today. I think when in planning, what I generally like to start with is what are one or two things that will be a step change bet. I'm not saying it's going to work 100%, but if one or two of these things work, it's a step change. So I always kind of know that in the back of my head of, yes, I really do want to take a swing here. And then I think the other piece is being really steeped in what has been the support feedback, what's been the customer feedback. We have a great IT wave makers program, which is similar to a customer advisory board. What is my sales team sharing? What have I heard from talking to customers myself, whether it's UXR calls or, launch calls with larger customers, et cetera. And then it's a bit of an art, right? There's all this science of you're going to get tons of data, but then you also need to take into account, how do these bodies of work interconnect? What is the most efficient way for us to sequence it? What is engineering giving feedback on, or they have an innovative idea on how we could solve this specific issue in a different way? And that's how you get into sequencing. But I think in general, I always like to start with, what are one or two things that would be a step change either in growth or in experience? And then from there, what are like the large, not even large, but like meaty buckets of improvements we could make to the product out in market? And so it's always a combination of those two things.
Like big bets or step up changes with kind of smaller wins, or what is that other bucket?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people talk about like boulders, rocks, and sand. I think that's like relatively helpful, but I think as much as you can narrow the focus on like, these are the two larger investments we want to make, and these are the 3 to 5 things that we just believe is the right thing to go fix, to go improve upon, and you have that clarity of thought as the leader. And it's like, yes, I as the IT suite lead, I have the clarity of thought for the suite, but then every single product manager needs to have that absolute clarity of thought of, these are my big bets. These are the next set of things that are also really important. And I'm going to be carving out this portion of my team to go work on this larger investment. And I'm going to have this other portion of my team methodically working through these improvements, these enhancements, these blockers to sales. And I think that generally leads to a healthier roadmap. But it all begins with clarity of thought.
And how much kind of energy do you allocate between those two big blocks, like the big bets versus the more midterm wins?
I'm a very ritualistic person. So my weeks generally always look the same from a product roadmap perspective. So I always have time on Mondays to go through the 1 or 2 key investments areas, but then I also meet with the various product leads and engineering leads to understand the health of how are we metabolizing the other portions of the roadmaps that are to improve the product, to unblock sales, and also to support our customer-facing teams, because customer needs constantly arise. And I think that's a fun part and a really challenging part of product management, is managing these emerging problems and opportunities.
I love rituals. I'm a geek for that. So I definitely need to learn more on that. Like if I were to zoom into your calendar and identify some of those major themes, like how do you usually kind of allocate your time? What are some of those key themes for you?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is that on Mondays, understanding where your key teams are on either big rocks and in quarterly commitments, and a touch base on how any new information that may have arisen over the last week. And so I basically do thematic Monday morning meetings with the various product leads and eng leads, and then I like to end the week with a team meeting. So you bookmark your week.
And then what's in between?
Product reviews, marketing reviews.
So like in the details.
Yes.
I think that is a commonality I've observed across not just founders, but like really high performing executives. It's obviously a place to delegate, but there is always a verified piece that it's important to kind of set the tone for what's excellence.
I also would say that during the week, and this is very much a part of the Rippling culture, is carving out time to go and see. So listening to sales calls, watching, UXR calls, and understanding how your product's being used, how that's being experienced is, I think, a lot of the reason as to why Rippling has been able to scale the way that it has is because of this go and see culture. And every single person is carving out time during the week to go and see and make sure that you actually understand it, whether it's competitive research that you're personally doing or reading support tickets or joining sales calls or watching gongs. It's really, really important to carve out that time to go and see. And I can tell you personally, when I feel really on top, everyone goes through ebbs and flows in their job, in their career. And I can say one thing that I've learned reflecting on my time at Rippling, I feel so much more present and on top of my role when I am carving out that time to go and see.
One of the, I think, critical aspects of being a high performing team is investing the right amount of time on the things that matter. And, like we come from a culture in the past of like, 9 to 5 work-life balance. I think now we're seeing more and more companies approaching the 996 culture. And I'm not sure either extreme is the right one, but I'm curious to know what is your take on the level of commitment and time investment that's required to be part of a high-performing team at Rippling?
That's an interesting question. I think it goes back to what I said at the beginning, which is, hey, you're joining a high growth stage startup. You're joining Rippling. You're choosing to come work for Parker. Isn't that exciting? Isn't that fun? And what that looks like for everyone, I think looks really different. But I don't think there's any way to succeed in that environment or in any company where you're truly building a company, a business. There are many employees, many customers without high levels of ownership. And I think in my experience, the right people know what that means and what it looks like. And they are going to own it all the way through, whether that looks like, hey, I'm working 9 to 4 and then I'm going to work for a couple hours in the evening. I don't have strong opinions on it.
Well, thank you for carving out time to sharing some of those insights with all of us. It's a pleasure. It's great to learn from your own experience building great products and great teams behind those products. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It was fun.